Welcome to MzansiVerse TV, where today we are counting down the top 10 battles in South African history. South Africa's history contains powerful kingdoms, expanding colonies, determined republics, and enough military miscalculations to fill an entire government tender document. For this list, we are ranking battles according to their historical importance, military drama, and lasting impact. Because these conflicts involved real suffering and loss of life, the jokes will target the decisions, commanders, and chaos, not the victims. Let the historical drama begin. Number 10. The Battle of Blaauwberg. In 1806, Britain decided that the Cape was simply too strategically important to leave in Dutch hands. The Cape controlled a valuable sea route between Europe and Asia. In other words, it was the international shipping intersection everyone wanted to own, long before Cape Town property prices became terrifying. British troops landed near Melkbosstrand and confronted the forces of the Batavian Republic at Blaauwberg. The defenders were defeated, and Cape Town surrendered shortly afterwards. Britain then took permanent control of the Cape Colony. This battle may not be as famous as some others on our list, but its consequences were enormous. British rule transformed the Cape's government, language, laws, and patterns of settlement. Basically, Britain arrived for a military operation and stayed for more than a century. Number 9. The Battle of Grahamstown. In 1919, thousands of Xhosa warriors, led by Makhanda, attacked the British colonial settlement of Grahamstown. Makhanda hoped to strike a major blow against colonial expansion following years of fighting over land, cattle, and control of the eastern frontier. The Xhosa forces greatly outnumbered Grahamstown's defenders. Unfortunately, bravery and numbers were forced to compete against muskets, artillery, and fortified positions. The attack came close to overwhelming the settlement, but British firepower eventually forced Makhanda's army to retreat. Makhanda later surrendered and was imprisoned on Robben Island. He drowned while attempting to escape in 1820. Yes, Robben Island was already being used for political prisoners long before Nelson Mandela arrived. That island's resume is disturbingly consistent. Number 8. The Battle of Vegkop. In 1836, a Voordtrekker group led by Hendrik Potgieter was attacked by a large Indabele force near present-day Heilbronn. The Voordtrekkers formed a defensive circle using their wagons. This was known as a lager, or as South Africans today might call it, extreme defensive parking. The Indabele launched repeated attacks, but the defenders used firearms from behind the wagons to hold their position. The Voordtrekkers survived, but the Indabele captured most of their livestock. So, technically, the defenders kept the battlefield but lost almost everything needed to continue traveling. Imagine winning a fight, walking outside, and discovering that your car, groceries, and entire moving company have disappeared. Vegkop demonstrated how effective the wagon lager could be, a strategy the Voordtrekkers would use again in later conflicts. Number 7. The Battle of Ndondakusa. This enormous battle took place in 1856 during a Zulu succession struggle between Cetshwayo and his half-brother Mbuyazi. King Mpande had not clearly settled who would succeed him, because apparently peacefully announcing an heir would have been far too convenient. Cetshwayo's supporters clashed with Mbuyazi's army near the lower Tukela River. Tens of thousands of warriors may have taken part, making it one of the largest battles ever fought between Zulu armies. Cetshwayo's forces won a devastating victory. Mbuyazi was killed, along with many of his followers. This battle effectively secured Cetshwayo's position as Mpande's eventual successor. He became king in 1972 and would later lead the Zulu kingdom during its famous confrontation with the British Empire. This was not merely a family disagreement. This was what happens when sibling rivalry gains military funding. Number 6. The Battle of Magersfontein. During the South African War, British commanders attempted to relieve the besieged town of Kimberley. In December 1999, British troops advanced towards Boer positions at Magersfontein. The Boers expected the British to defend the top of the hills, but Boer General Piet Cronje positioned many of his riflemen in trenches near the bottom. The British Highland Brigade advanced before sunrise in a tightly packed formation. When the Boer riflemen opened fire from their concealed positions, the brigade was caught completely exposed. The British suffered a serious defeat. Magersfontein formed part of what became known as Black Week, when Britain suffered 3 major defeats at Stormberg, Magersfontein and Colenso. It was the 19th century military version of having 3 terrible Mondays in the same week. The battle showed that traditional battlefield formations were becoming dangerously outdated against modern rifles and well-prepared defensive positions. Number 5. The Battle of Spion Kop. In January 1900, British troops attempted to capture Spion Kop, a steep hill overlooking the route towards Ladysmith. They climbed the hill at night and believed they had reached the summit. In the darkness and thick mist, however, they fortified the wrong position. That is right. Hundreds of soldiers climbed a mountain, started digging, and later discovered that the mountain had more mountain. When the mist cleared, the British troops found themselves exposed to Boer rifle and artillery fire from surrounding heights. Confusion spread through the British command. Orders contradicted one another, reinforcements struggled to arrive, and soldiers endured hours of intense fighting with little protection. The British eventually withdrew, even though the Boer forces were also close to abandoning their positions. So technically, both sides spent part of the battle believing they were losing. The British simply acted on the belief first. Future world leaders Winston Churchill, Louis Botha, and Mohandas Gandhi were all connected to the wider campaign around Spion Kop. The battle's name later became famous in British football, where steep spectator stands were nicknamed Kops. Number 4. The Battle of Majuba Hill. In 1881, during the First Anglo-Boer War, British troops occupied Majuba Hill, overlooking Boer positions near the Transvaal border. Holding the high ground should have given the British a huge advantage. Should have. The soldiers had limited defensive preparations, unclear command arrangements, and no proper artillery support. Boer marksmen climbed the hill using rocks and vegetation as cover, then opened accurate fire on the British positions. The British line collapsed. Major General Sir George Pomeroy Colley was killed, and his forces fled down the hill. Majuba became a symbol of Boer resistance and helped bring the First Anglo-Boer War to an end. The Transvaal regained self-government over British oversight. For Britain, it was an important lesson. Owning the top of the hill means very little if you forget to defend the hill. Number 3. The Battle of Blood River. In December 1838, a Voetrekker force led by Andreas Pretorius confronted a much larger Zulu army near the Nkome River. The Voetrekkers created a fortified wagon laager and used firearms and cannon to defend it. Before the battle, they made a religious vow that they would commemorate the day if they were victorious. Zulu regiments launched repeated attacks but could not break through the defensive position. Thousands of Zulu warriors were reportedly killed, although exact casualty figures remain debated. The Voetrekkers suffered only a few injuries. This battle became central to Afrikaner nationalist history and was commemorated for generations as the Day of the Vow. Today, the site presents different historical perspectives through the Blood River and Nkome museums. That's important because South African history rarely fits neatly into one side's version of events. If somebody claims our history is simple, immediately hide the history textbook from them. Number 2. The Defense of Rorke's Drift. On the night of January 22, 1979, a small British garrison at the mission station of Rorke's Drift faced an attack by several thousand Zulu warriors. Roughly 150 British and colonial troops built barricades using mealie bags, biscuit boxes, and whatever else was available. It sounds like the defense was organized by someone who had just emptied a macro warehouse. The Zulu attackers repeatedly came close to breaking into the position. Fighting continued for hours, sometimes at extremely close range. The defenders held out, and 11 Victoria Crosses were eventually awarded to soldiers involved in the defense. Rorke's Drift became one of Britain's most celebrated military stories. However, its fame also helped distract attention from the catastrophic British defeat that had occurred earlier that same day. Yes, the British Empire experienced its worst disaster in the region, and its public relations department immediately said, "Quick, focus on the smaller battle." Number 1. The Battle of Isandlwana. Taking the top spot is the Battle of Isandlwana. In January 1879, British forces invaded the independent Zulu kingdom. The British Army possessed modern rifles, artillery, and enormous confidence. The confidence may have been the heaviest item they brought with them. Lord Chelmsford divided his forces and left part of his central column camped beneath Isandlwana without forming a proper defensive laager. A Zulu army of around 20,000 warriors launched a carefully coordinated attack using the famous Horns of the Buffalo formation. The center engaged the British position while the two horns moved around its sides. British soldiers initially delivered heavy rifle fire, but their extended defensive line came under increasing pressure. As the Zulu forces closed in, the British position collapsed. More than 1,000 British and colonial troops were killed. It became one of the greatest victories achieved by an African army against a technologically advanced European imperial force. Isandlwana shocked Britain and demonstrated the organization, courage, and tactical ability of the Zulu army. The British eventually returned with overwhelming reinforcements and defeated the Zulu kingdom. But Isandlwana remained unforgettable. An empire arrived expecting a quick demonstration of military superiority. Instead, the Zulu army delivered one of history's most dramatic rejection letters. And that is why the Battle of Isandlwana takes the number 1 position. What battle do you think had the greatest impact on South African history? Let us know in the comments. And remember to subscribe to MzansiVerse TV for more South African history, culture, and chaos, presented with slightly more humor than your old school textbook.